performed amputation surgeries on thousands of patients, but the hardest surgery he ever had to complete was his own.
I lost both my legs below the knees, so I'm now a bilateral below knee amputee.
I didn't realise how frustrating it was for patients.
It's not easy being an amputee, not at all, but also it's not too bad.
A respected surgeon, a family man, a story of survival that inspired millions. In 2019, Neil Hopper was praised as a hero, the surgeon who lost both legs to sepsis, but refused to give up. He fought back. He learned to walk again. He even returned to the operating theater, operating on patients while wearing prosthetic legs. The press called him Britain's bravest man. His patients called him the Bionic Surgeon. But behind that smile, there was another story, one hidden for years. One investigators say turned his tale of courage into one of deception, obsession, and fraud. This is the story of Neil Hopper, and it's not the story you think you know. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Medical Crime Files and turn on notifications. We bring you true stories of doctors, nurses, and hospitals where trust was betrayed. And drop a comment below. When a story seems too perfect, do you believe it or do you question it? Neil Hopper grew up in Wales, reported locally as Aberystwyth. The son of 2 nurses, he was raised in a family that valued care and medicine. He studied anatomical sciences, then trained as a doctor at Cardiff University. Years of study and practice followed until he became a vascular surgeon, the kind of specialist who saves limbs, who restores circulation, who fights to preserve life. By 2013, Neil was a consultant vascular surgeon at the Royal Cornwall Hospital's NHS Trust in Truro, England. He had a wife, Rachel, and 2 young children. To colleagues, he was professional and highly skilled. To patients, he was reassuring, calm, and compassionate. From the outside, Neil Hopper seemed to have it all. That spring, the Hopper family went camping in the Cornish countryside. It was meant to be a peaceful trip, a holiday with his wife and children. But late that night, Neil and his young daughter fell ill. Both began vomiting, feverish and weak. By morning, the family packed up early and returned home. Within a few days, his daughter recovered, but Neil didn't. His fever lingered. He felt drained, unsteady, and strange. Thinking it was just a stubborn stomach bug, his wife Rachel decided to take the children to visit her parents, leaving Neil at home to rest. The next day, she called to check on him, but something was wrong. His words made no sense. He sounded confused, alarmed. Rachel phoned a colleague who lived nearby and asked her to go check on him. When that colleague arrived, Neil was barely conscious, pale, sweating, his blood pressure dangerously low. An ambulance was called immediately. He was rushed to hospital, the very same one where he worked. In intensive care, doctors fought to stabilize him. Intravenous fluids, antibiotics, oxygen. He survived, but the damage was done. His feet had turned black. Circulation was gone. The tissue was dying. At first, surgeons removed his toes, but the necrosis spread. Within weeks, it was clear. The only way to save his life was to amputate both lower legs. Neil signed consent form the night before surgery. It was his wife's birthday. That night, he suffered his first ever panic attack. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. The weight of what was about to happen hit him. The next morning, surgeons amputated both of his legs below the knee. When Neil woke up, he felt lighter. His energy returned. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't fighting an infection, but his life had changed forever. Recovery was slow. Neil used a wheelchair. He battled phantom pain, the sensation of feet that were no longer there. He grew frustrated with the gaps in care. Physiotherapy felt designed for elderly patients, not someone like him. But Neil pushed himself harder. He found private trainers, worked out in local gyms, and prepared for prosthetic limbs. When he finally received them, the results were astonishing. Doctors expected him to need months of training. Neil was walking within hours. Soon, He was dancing with his children, running short distances, even returning to the hobbies he loved. The press took notice. Interviews followed. Headlines called him inspirational, the Bionic Surgeon. Neil himself leaned into the role. He set up social media pages, posted progress updates, gave motivational talks. He became a face of resilience. And in October 2019, just 6 months after losing both legs, he returned to surgery. Imagine it, a double amputee, standing at the operating table, performing complex vascular operations. Patients were in awe. Colleagues admired his determination. It seemed like a miracle story. But miracles don't always last. By 2020, Neil Hopper's story had spread nationwide. He was featured in interviews, honored with awards, even considered by the European Space Agency for a new par-astronaut program for disabled candidates. But while his public reputation grew, investigators in Devon and Cornwall were quietly following a different trail. Questions began to surface. How exactly had his legs been lost? Why did the details not quite add up? And what was hidden in his private online life? Before we continue, what do you think? Was Neil Hopper simply a victim of bad luck and sepsis? Or is there always more to the story than meets the eye? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to share this video if you believe these stories need to be told. By early 2023, the image of Neil Hopper had become almost untouchable. A surgeon, a survivor, a national symbol of courage. But behind the public applause, something else was happening. Something his hospital, his patients, and even his family never saw coming. That spring, whispers began inside Royal Cornwall Hospital. An internal audit flagged an unusual insurance claim, one filed years earlier after his amputations. At first, it looked routine, until investigators noticed details that didn't fit. The timeline, the medical records, the nature of his injuries. They didn't match the expected pattern of sepsis. Specialists reviewing his case grew uneasy. The necrosis, the death of his leg tissue, didn't behave like infection. It looked more like frostbite. Soon, the quiet review turned into a full investigation. By March 2023, Neil Hopper was suspended from his surgical duties. A month later, the General Medical Council imposed restrictions on his license. Still, the public didn't know why. Rumors spread. Some said it was an administrative issue. Others thought it was stress-related. But behind closed doors, detectives from Devon and Cornwall police had begun digging into a darker lead. They had reason to believe that Neil Hopper's amputations were not caused by sepsis at all, but by deliberate injury, self-inflicted, frozen. When officers searched his devices, they uncovered messages, videos, and payment records that stunned even experienced investigators. Because among his digital files was a link to a website called Unique Maker. Unique Maker was no medical forum. It was part of a network run by a Norwegian man named Marius Gustafsson, the so-called Unique Maker. His operation had been shut down the previous year after police discovered he'd been performing illegal castrations and amputations in a London basement and streaming them online. And Neil Hopper, the respected British surgeon, wasn't just a viewer. He was a paying customer. Investigators found records showing that between 2018 and 2020, he'd purchased 3 extreme surgical videos from the site. Footage of men willingly undergoing amputations and genital removal. He had also exchanged more than 1,500 messages with Gustafsson himself. In those messages, Hopper asked detailed medical questions. He wanted to know the effects of dry ice on human tissue, how long it would take for limbs to freeze, how deep the damage would go. And then came one message that stopped investigators cold. "I've dreamt this for 20 years, he wrote. Another said, "It's going to be awesome being a double amputee." By the time police pieced together the evidence, a chilling theory emerged. Neil Hopper hadn't lost his legs to infection. He had frozen them, intentionally, using ice and dry ice until the tissue died, forcing doctors to amputate. His motive? Investigators said it was twofold: obsession and greed. He had claimed more than £460,000 in insurance payouts by reporting the amputations as a result of sepsis. Money that funded home improvements, a camper van, even a hot tub. When the findings became public in 2025, the shock was immediate. How could Britain's bravest surgeon be hiding something so grotesque? How could a man trusted to save limbs destroy his own? At trial, prosecutors described a long-standing fixation known as body integrity dysphoria, a rare psychological condition where a person feels part of their body doesn't belong to them. Experts said Hopper may have lived with it for decades. But what made his case so disturbing wasn't just a disorder. It was a deception that followed. He had lied to his colleagues, to his wife, to the public. He built an entire brand, the Bionic Surgeon, on a story that wasn't true, and he monetized it. In court, Hopper admitted 2 counts of fraud and 3 counts of possessing extreme adult material. The judge called the harm in those videos exceptionally high. When asked why he did it, Hopper told investigators he didn't regret losing his legs, only the lies that followed. He said he was overwhelmed by support from friends and couldn't bring himself to tell the truth. But for many, that explanation wasn't enough. His patients, some amputees themselves, felt betrayed. They wondered whether the man who'd operated on them had done so out of compassion or obsession. On September 4th, 2025, Neil Hopper was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison for fraud and possession of extreme content. He will serve his time in prison in southwest England. Outside court, a hospital spokesperson said there was no evidence that any of his patients were harmed, but the damage to public trust was already done, and that trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. If you've watched this far, thank you. But here's a question for you. Can a person still be called a hero if their story was built on lies? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe the public deserves to know how medical trust can be twisted, share this video. Subscribe to Medical Crime Files and stay tuned. Because this isn't the only case where medicine crossed a line. The next story is even darker. You're watching Medical Crime Files. Trust betrayed.